Hello, gentlemen.
Testing.
Hi. Hi.
So, as Shona was saying, I mean, we're here this evening, of course, to talk a bit about not only your impressions of the Intensely Dutch exhibition upstairs, but also, you know, naturally a bit about your own work as well. And I know that both of you came to Australia decades ago, and Matthys, it was, what, in 1972 for you as a teenager, and Jelle, it was in 1983. So just to kick off, Jelle, take me back to the days when you moved to Australia. What inspired your move?
I was in the. I was 2 years in a thing that's called the Beeldende Kunstenaarsregeling in Holland, which provides you with funds for artists. It's a very good system. It's a social responsibility of the Dutch government to look after their artists. It was so fantastic to be in that I decided I should get out. Because it was very, very good, and also coming from a large family, a working class family who don't really have a great deal of art in their background, it was good to go very, very far. And my auntie was in Newcastle, and I went there, and it was great. So that's my memory of it, but I didn't come here for any great artistic purposes, because when art students want to go somewhere in Europe, they always want to go to Berlin or New York, but not to Sydney. So I thought I was pretty special to get here. Yeah.
And was it really different from where you grew up? I know that you grew up in a place called Lemmer. What's Lemmer like?
It's a little fishing port. It's like Wollongong. There's no fish. It's on the Zuiderzee, which is the old inside lake. All people are fishermen there in character, but there's not a great deal of fishing going on. It's just mainly tourism now. Yeah.
And for you, Matthys, your move to Australia, I was reading that it was rather stressful as an experience for you when you were a teenager in 1972. Is that true?
How did you find that out?
Because I've been researching.
Well, then I have to repeat it, maybe.
Yeah. No, what happened? When you moved to Australia in 1972, you were a teenager and...
71, I think. Like in 70, yeah, it was a move that was made necessary by my father moving around as a corporate manager and executive. And we were here for 3 years originally, and that was changed very dramatically at, I remember, kind of like maybe a dinner conversation where my parents announced that they were going to migrate and stay. And there was a shock and horror to me, like contrary to, you know, sort of Jelle's experience. I didn't want to stay at all and wanted to go back as soon as possible. So the rest of the family officially became Australian, and I didn't. I held on to my Dutch citizenship, which I still have got. The Dutch don't allow for dual citizenship, so I don't loathe to give it up. 35 years or whatever it is now hence, I'm still here. I think it took me about 20 years to like Australia. Sort of like, you know, like, sort of like I just I wouldn't move back now, but yeah, for a very long time I felt like I was always going to head back somehow. And
I also read that part of the reason why you couldn't go back initially was because of the conscription program that was.
It's true. I was scared of that too. Yeah, like that's something that's like if you. I think you enlisted for 2 years of like of that, and that's something that I kept away from. Yeah. And
so now that we've heard about Lemmer, the fishing town, what was the town of Delft? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I was born in Delft, and but I didn't actually live there for very long. It would have been 2 or 3 years when we moved to Vlaardingen, and then from there on to Zwijndrecht, which are like kind of suburban satellites to Rotterdam, I think.
For sure. So when, Jelle, you came to Australia in 1983, you said that you didn't come necessarily because of your art, but you'd already studied, though, hadn't you? You'd already been studying in the Netherlands and done a degree in painting. You came to Australia. What did it take for you to get into the art scene? Was it difficult to infiltrate being from elsewhere?
Yeah. To be in Sydney at that time, it wasn't very cosmopolitan then, I think. That was 82. There weren't that many galleries that were exciting to to think that you were in. But, you know, it all happened very fast. I think there were lots of young people studying in those days, coming out of art schools, starting up collectives, and we formed a collective with a group of people. It opened up a lot of opportunities for people to show work at a young age, and I think previously, it must have been fairly conservative, the character of commercial galleries, and I think in some ways, you know, it's still a conservative sort of overall scene, but it isn't, because there is a lot of new things are happening in Australia. I think now Europe can be quite jealous of Australia in terms of, you know, the way the gallery system operates. I think it's changed a lot in the last 20 years.
So when you talk about collectives, because you were part of a couple of collectives back in the Netherlands when you were a young fella, the Zebra, and what was the other one called?
The Lui. The Lui is the lazy ones.
So was it like Zen art? Did you actually do anything?
Yeah, we were very good in cleaning up. We were always... The greatest thing that ever came out of that group was that we were cosy. You know, we were together. And we enjoyed each other's company. And I think we had a lot of talk. We didn't talk about Cobra. But we talked about lots of issues which were relevant to the international sort of developments.
What do you mean you didn't talk about Cobra? Because that's, of course, the group that's upstairs.
Yeah, that's what we should be talking about.
Yeah, where?
I think.
So you didn't talk about Cobra at all? Were they massive influences on you?
We talked about Cobra in the sense that, you know, there were developments that were suddenly taking up space for discussion internationally, and that was exciting. But you know, in those days, in the 70s, everybody was looking towards America, and they were looking towards minimalism, abstract expressionism, and of course Willem de Kooning, who is in this show. And these two works that are in the show are fantastic. Those two, they're key works, I think, for the development of Dutch art. And I think it says that on some of the labels that, you know, de Kooning is really the figure that came out of these circumstances, but he turned up in another place. So he's not necessarily...
Yeah, he moved to America quite early on, didn't he?
Yeah. Like Mondrian.
Like Mondrian. And yeah, and those are also the two streams in Dutch art. You know, you've got the Protestants, and you have Mondrians, and you have the others. And I don't know what you are, Matthys, but are you a Protestant?
No, I'm neither. No, I don't.
Because everything's divided in Holland between, you know, left and right, and it's not serious though. It's not like you can't talk to the other, but it is very, very segregated in social activities.
So just quickly, Matthys, when you came to Australia, of course, you sort of, I know that I was sort of also reading that you were influenced heavily by Salvador Dali, your grandmother took you to an exhibition, all this kind of stuff, and you were looking back towards European art, to Cobra and to Surrealism, is that right? Not so much what was happening here in Australia?
Not so much back, no, it's not back, because my grandmother took me to an exhibition of a retrospective of Salvador Dali in the Van Beuningen in Rotterdam, when I must have been about 7, or but it's something that was... the Cobra, I still remember that my parents had a lounge room where there was a reproduction of a painting of Karel Appel hanging side by side with, on the other side, a print of Mondrian. And somehow that always, you know, like for a small infant, that I think that left the impression that somehow they're connected. That in Dutch art, I think that Riske was talking about the other day, sort of like that in Dutch art, the colour is so important, and you can see that in the tricolour of the flag already, that the both Cobra and the style have got that in common, very clear sort of like sense of colour, which is not something that necessarily translates in the Australian counterparts of, you know, like the Olsen, like variety of the kind of Cobra in Australia. It's very much earthier than the Dutch. And so the two prints, in some ways, to me, were always like a kind of more a wild expressionist version of the kind of Mondrian painting seemed to be translated in the Appel thing. But so like a retrospective view of European art. Yeah, that's probably true, but on the other hand, sort of like, it's a major influence for me. For example, now it's I see it as being Aboriginal painting, which I would sort of like praise as being more interesting than most other painting that goes on here.
And actually, is it Teo Kuiper's upstairs also? He's one of the artists who's featured. He also is heavily influenced by Indigenous painting when he came to visit Australia as well.
It just looks so good, and it does something very similar to, I suppose, a Cobra feel of like being an organic kind of method of painting, which I think is...
Just really basically, I mean, Cobra, what does it stand for? And just give me an understanding of, having grown up in Holland, how important they were, especially as artists, to growing up. For example, we, here in Australia, would grow up, at school learning about Brett Whiteley or Joy Hester or Albert Tucker, etc. Tell me a bit about the legacy of Cobra, at least.
Well, Cobra was founded by artists moving in literary circles. Making a strong connection through literary ideas, similar to the style in lots of ways, but in a much more complex time, being in just after the war, Second World War, and the artists from Denmark, I think, had a big influence on the artists from Holland, and I think that's
more Asger Jorn and the Danish side than the Dutch.
The Danish were...
They were the intellectuals anyway.
I think they were more the initiators of the group. And then, because there was so much movement towards internationalization, simply because of the energy of the places had to be reinvented, everything sort of turned towards a little bit towards Paris. And I think in Cobra, what I see in most of the works is the school of Paris. It's a reinvention, a much wilder form of the School of Paris, which is, it's almost genetic to me. When I look at Lucebert and Constant, those artists, they all have digits of the École de Paris.
But they also go back.
Yeah.
They go back to their, respective countries and sort of like invent a particular kind of like something that's linked to a kind of folk style or something much more parochial.
Well, there's a much more raw edge to it, and if you've seen the film of Apple, I don't know if you've seen the film of Apple, but it's really good to see that because it does bring out the performance aspect of the work, and I think the performance aspect was always important for these people, and that's also what I take away from it. I think this is what interests me the most.
So talk to me a bit more about that performance aspect. Tell me about Apple and what he does in that film, for example, that we see, and how that impacts on you.
Well, Apple confronts this painting with Dizzy Gillespie in the background, which is a really good move. And
didn't he write a score for it as well?
Yeah. And then he just goes for it. It's the kind of thing that you want to see in your lounge room, the sort of thing that you want artists to be thinking about, that they get really, really, really upset and then go for. So that's what we dream about, don't we, Matthys? Like sometimes we want to be very, very instinctive about painting, I suppose, and I think they did that, with gusto, and that was the strength of it, I think.
And now that's sort of like lampooned very well by Paul McCarthy and whatever.
Well, that's
works.
not. We don't want to go there.
But it's. When it comes to your work, though, when you're saying, Jelle, that you have to be instinctive about it, how do you sort of separate yourself from perhaps what we might see upstairs and the style and the practice that is sort of part of your heritage in some ways, to actually creating a new voice and a new style, something that's uniquely your own?
Yeah, well, when I came into that show, I'd already been to the Forum, and the Forum was incredibly poetic and fantastic. So when you go into the show with that feeling of, of course it's all about the memory of it, and it's also about the poetry of the country, I suppose, and it's water. And the water balance in the painting is quite strong. For me, when I see the fluidity, the stronger the fluidity in the work, the more exciting it gets. So Bram van Velde for me is, when I was an art student, Bram van Velde was my pin-up. I was copying that for about 5 years. I was completely overwhelmed by that work. And walking into that room and seeing it on the end wall was very, very mesmerizing. It was, it's a strong recognition. But what happens in that painting is really good. There's these, it's because there is no subject matter. And I think the discussions about the work is also really good. There is no subject matter as such. There is the theme of the removing it from representation as such. but there isn't so much subject matter. There's freedom, and that's the theme.
Vivacity or something like that.
But with Bram van Velde, that turns into deafening silence, which is great.
How about for you, Matthys? Is there a couple of works or a particular work, you know, when you instantly walked into that room that cast an impression?
Yeah, the Van Velde is definitely probably the outstanding pieces of Schoonhoven, like the Apple, the Koning, stuff like. I find, you know, like the number of works there that like the interesting thing for me is more the stuff like the I suppose it's sort of like the like what you said, sort of like the subject matter is actually not so important. It's a bit like sort of Basil is sort of like turning paintings upside down or whatever, that they find images in it, and sort of like in the fact that they find birds in it, or sort of like you know, like animals, like that. To me, is sort of like, you know, like used as a kind of an end point, the same way as like Willem de Koning's beginnings of like the lips of like a woman or something like that. So it's not so important what the paintings are about or signifying, sort of like as representational paintings. I see them as being much more an abstraction that was necessary in the wake of a kind of a loss of like the faith in rationalism, like through the Second World War, probably.
So when you look at those works, how much of a connection then do you feel with the, obviously they're not things that we see, there might be a bird or some kind of image that's quite obvious in there, but how much of a connection in your art do you feel when you see those sorts of work? Do you see this like almost a through line between...
Yeah, a lot. Like, I think that it's almost like it's a physical experience almost. I think that it's a shame that in Australia I don't think that's quite felt in the same way, that you sort of own particular kinds of paintings as a people, as a sort of like a particular regional or sort of like a physical sort of like relationship that, like I said before, I think that's a very maybe only an Aboriginal sort of like experience, like that the paintings stand for something else, which is a physical relationship to the land and whatever. Like you mentioned, the water, or you know, for me it's more the mud, or this stuff like, you know, the abundance of like grey skies or blue skies in Holland, you know. But in the same way, it could be translated to, for example, like us embracing Aboriginal painting as being ours, or like something that we feel, you know, kinship for in the future. But it's definitely, yeah, it's like, you know, like if I like it or not, it's almost irrespective of the fact that you feel a particular Dutchness about, you know, particular paintings, definitely.
A lack of having a female artist represented is a concern for you? What else?
A tokenism is.
That's also a concern.
Yeah, if it was just one, and in the Cobra readings, you find that Lily van der Gaag was probably the most internationally active person. She shared studios with people, and she was, you know, she was a really interesting sculptor. I can't see from the work that I see in the books that she would have been too hard to transport. It doesn't look like bronze or concrete. It looks more like small plaster work. And
I mean, are they colourful? What do they look like?
Really? They're sort of non-colour, but they are. She was also a painter, so there must be drawings of her as well. So she could have been in it. There are other people who could have been in it, because Torup's mother, Fernhout's mother, Charlie Torup, she's fantastic as a lead into this, because she's a realist, but she's definitely an expressionist, and I think she would have been a very, very interesting addition to the. But you know, you can, of course, what can you do? You can open this whole building up to the Dutch 20th century, and that would be fine. Then you would have to employ probably 5 curators to do it, and we would be happy to do that. But I think, you know, there's a lot of room for a lot of art. Since the 80s and 90s, that, you know, postmodernism has really redefined the Dutch art. I think there's a lot more figurative work going back to traditions, and of course this group of people is not really that. There's much more rejecting of the old golden age of Dutch art. And that's fantastic about this show. This is really a good, I think that's also the strength of it, that, you know, there is a rejection of the tradition.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But, I mean, these are artists that you know very much about, and I must say that my knowledge of Dutch art post-World War II, until I saw this exhibition, was pretty limited.
You didn't have it, yeah.
But I didn't really have it, and I can't imagine that many people in some ways did, because the knowledge is limited in some ways here in Australia. But why is it important then for us to learn, to discover?
Well, because they're all going to come here soon, because it's New Holland.
He told me he was going to turn Australia into New Holland, make it happen.
That's a very old idea for most people, but for me that is actually very current. And I think for given the Dutch are easy to infiltrate cultural dimensions, don't you think? As Berg pointed out in his talk as well, that they move quite freely because they speak English.
If you now live in Holland for 2 years, you're considered to be a Dutch artist. So,
yeah.
So they just claim anybody coming from anywhere. What's that? But it's it's quite in that sense always has been a very tolerant, open, sort of like a policy of what is considered.
There are also lots of we have lots in common because we have the same kind of attitude to the democracy and the trade with Japan. And I think the trade with Japan is, I guess that is our biggest cultural challenge. I think culture, not trade. Trade is easy, but culture is hard, and I think the Dutch have always had a very good relationship with the Far East and the Middle East. The Middle East not so far, but the Far East. And I think East India Company and all those sorts of movements have started a lot of interesting lines for people to investigate. I think to research.
And you both have strong connections then back home, if I can say that. Yes.
Strong
in Holland.
Family, and I show there regularly, but it's not strong because they don't really understand what we do here. That is odd. I think they should be much more interested in Australia than what. I mean, we are actually quite open to Europe, I think, but I think the other way around doesn't really work very well, and I think that's strange. So there should be much more dialogue.
So just to finish up with, this is the dumb question of the night. Do you call yourselves Dutch Australian artists, just Australian artists, or something else entirely? Matthys?
I call myself a Dutch-born Australian, artist. That's like I don't.
Very good.
I don't
Tick.
know.
Double Dutch.
Double Dutch. Yeah.
I knew somebody was going to get that in. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you both. Thank you so much, and please give them a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.